Hello, Oak Grove community. Welcome to week 14 morning meeting. This week, I want to begin with an imaginary story. The story begins, I want you to imagine yourself as a person who is hungry and starving. Perhaps this picture might help your imagination a bit. So imagine that you are starving and you have been wandering around the city looking for food. And you found some scraps of food here and there, but everything you've tried has only made you feel more and more sick and more hungry. What little you do find does not satisfy and is not helping your hunger. Not only have you tried looking for food, but you've also tried looking for work, something you can do to try to earn money so that you can get food. But everyone that sees you apply for work, they say, you're too dirty, you smell, sorry, we can't help you. And they turn you away. Imagine after weeks, many days of this, imagine how you would feel. Exhausted, discouraged, depressed, lonely, and don't forget, hungry and starving. You probably get to a point where you just can't, let's say you get to that point where you can't go any further. You can't ask another person for work. You cannot continue your search for food and you are completely spent. And then something strange happens. You look up, someone walks up to you and you smell something sweet, something that you feel like maybe you haven't smelled in a long time, but you know this smell. It's this incredible smell. It's been so long you've almost forgotten what it smells like. And then you know it's fresh bread. You look up and there's a man holding this fresh bread. It's still steaming. And he says, "Hi there. Would you like something to eat? I have bread here for you." And you see it, but then you remember the rejection from before and you say, "Sorry, sir, I don't have any money to buy your bread." "Well, that's okay," the man says. "You don't need money for my bread." "Oh, but so you think, okay, well, I must have to work." So and you tell the man, "I'm sorry, I can't work for it either. I have no strength left." And the man smiles and he says, "You don't need to work for me to earn this bread. This bread is for all who are hungry and cannot feed themselves." Incredulous, you reach out and take the bread and you eat and eat. And at first your jaws almost don't even work because they have not eaten like this in so long. And as you continue to eat the bread, it begins to warm your body. And you feel slowly but surely your strength returning. Finally, you have finished the whole loaf. It was the most amazing experience of your life. And then the man says, "Would you like some more?" And you stand up and the man turns and shows you, he points to a store that is filled with bread. He says, "You can have all the bread you want. It is available anytime. And don't worry, I have already paid for all of it." You can hardly believe how things have changed. And for the next several weeks, you enjoy many loaves of bread and other food and fellowship with this man. and your hope and your sense of um, and your strength returns. Well, a few weeks later, the same man comes to you as you're enjoying one of your meals, and he says, I want to share my bread with hungry people in other cities. Would you be willing to help me share my bread with them? Would you go with me to give them my bread? What would you say? Would you would you feel compelled to share this bread with others who are hungry like you were? Would you feel overwhelmed by the gratitude and the joy of the free gift that you have received and want to bring it to others? Would you freely share which you have freely received? You see, there are many who are hungry in this world, and they are not just hungry for food, they are hungry for life. They are hungry for hope. Jesus, is in his ministry, when he was instructing his disciples, he told them once, he says, as you go, proclaim this message: the kingdom of heaven has come near. Heal the sick, raise the dead, cleanse those who have leprosy, drive out demons. Freely you have received, freely give. Jesus himself, he said that he is the bread of life, and he offered himself freely, and he calls all of his followers to freely offer what they have freely received from him. Now I want you to imagine a very different scenario. Now we're not just talking about bread, but we're talking about spiritual hunger. Right now, this is the reality. This is not imaginary. Right now, there are about 2.1 billion people in the world who have never heard of Christ. Nearly 1 out of every 4 people, that's about 25% of the human population, they have no Bible. In fact, they may not even know the Bible exists, or if they've seen a Bible, it's not a Bible that they can understand in their language. There is no church that they can go to or attend to hear about God, to hear about the good news of Christ. They don't know any followers of Christ who might be able to teach them or help them or show what it looks like to follow Christ. They have no idea who Jesus is. I want you to take a moment to imagine what that might be like. And it's very difficult for us, especially in our school community, to understand what that would be like. Your parents might be able to understand it, though, or maybe a friend of yours. So imagine, let's continue this. Imagine what your life would be like if you had no knowledge of God. Well, if you had no knowledge that God exists, how would you see your existence? You might likely think that your life doesn't really have a purpose. You just kind of were born and showed up. You're here by chance. Your life on earth, if there is no spiritual realm, you have no idea of heaven or hell, then this is all that there is, your life here. So what happens if you get sick or if you get a disease? What happens if you lose all of your friends and are alone? What happens if you lose your home and your possessions? If this life is all that you have and you lose those things that are dear and precious to us, what hope would you have? What real hope? There are a lot of people right now that are very scared of COVID-19 and other diseases, of course. Imagine facing our situation right now. Imagine facing these diseases without the hope of a Savior. For most people, though, for most of these 2.1 billion who have never heard of Christ, they do believe there is some kind of spiritual power. Okay, so imagine that scenario. You know there's a spiritual power, but you don't know how to connect to that spiritual power. You don't know if that spiritual power is personal or impersonal. You don't know if there is a God, if that God favors you or likes you or would help you. And so what would you do? Well, maybe like these two boys in this picture, you would do all you can to get that God's attention, to try to please that God and hope that just maybe they might have ears to hear you and be able to help you. You would do all you can to hope that if your life does end on this earth, that maybe your existence can be in a good place after you die, but you wouldn't know. You would not be able to have that confidence of the favor of that God. How would you know if what you have done has been good enough, or if you have to keep doing more things, or maybe you've been doing the wrong things? How would you know which teacher to trust, who tells you about this God? And so what happens to a person who's living trying to please a God they don't fully know or don't have full confidence that hears them? Well, either you would just continue to try to work harder and harder, hoping it's enough, or maybe you just give up, still be without hope, and just try to do the best you can. But again, with no confidence about how things are going to work out, hoping that you just have good luck. That is the reality for 1/4 of the world's population, arguably more than that. But the quarter that has never even heard of Jesus, they don't even know the option is out there. This is what the situation was like in Burma when Adoniram and Nancy Judson arrived. We talked last week about how different the environment was, the food, the language, the clothes, the poverty. But the biggest, most shocking, and desperate difference was that the Burmese people had no concept of an eternal, personal, loving God. They had no Bible. They had no knowledge of Jesus. They were completely lost. So I want to close with a few questions for you to discuss with your mom and dad or your classmates or teacher. I want you to consider, how should we, those of us who are Christians, how should Christians respond with the knowledge that there are people in the world who have never even heard once about Christ? Notice there's a difference between unreached and unbelief. There are many around us in America who simply refuse to believe the truth of the gospel. But there are many who have not even heard, even had the chance, if you will, to reject the gospel because they have never heard it. How should we respond to that reality? Where do these unreached peoples live? There are still some in Burma. They're in many other parts of the world. I encourage you to try to find out, where are those places? Where are those people? What are Christians trying to do today to reach them? Is there a way that we can reach them? Is there a way that we can be involved? Let's circle back to how we began with the bread, and you're starving. And you're given this bread freely, as we've been given the gospel freely here in America and in our churches, in our neighborhoods, by our families. And the Lord asks us, would you freely give what you have freely received? Would you take this bread, the bread of life, with you and make sure or do all you can to get it to those places where people are starving for me? This is how the Apostle Paul saw this. He wrote in Romans 15, in his letters to the Romans, in Romans 15, 20, 21, he said, "It has always been my ambition to preach the gospel where Christ was not known, so that I would not be building on someone else's foundation. Rather, as it is written, those who were not told about him will see, and those who have not heard will understand." Oak Grove community, let us consider this reality very carefully. We have tons of food. What are we going to do with it? Have a wonderful week. After the Thanksgiving break, I will share with you about some of the specific challenges that the Judsons ran into with the belief systems of the Burmese people, and also how the gospel began to bear fruit. Thank you. Take care.